Story number 9, Cottage Adventures at Murray Lake, Good Fishing. My brother Christopher loved fishing. He dreamed often about going fishing and just enjoying time at a lake, river, creek, or any other place where one could drop a line to catch fish. He told me most, however, it was the country atmosphere, peace and tranquility, and just the feel of having that fishing rod in one's hand and smelling of the fresh air that made him enjoy the event of going fishing so much. He never really cared much if he caught a huge catch or not. It was more about the adventure. Over the years, I have shared a few great fishing trips with Chris or with my parents or other siblings. However, the absolute best fishing trip was with Chris when he was a young adult, and I was a freshly minted teenager at age 13. To celebrate my transition from kid to teenager, Chris proposed that we take a break and go on a fishing trip to Murray Lake and have an extra long weekend at our parents' cottage up in the Polish hills. He proposed that it would just be the two of us. We could spend some quality brother bonding time and share stories and jokes together as we dipped our fish lines into the water. I was game. I loved spending time at our parents' camp. I loved spending time with Chris. It was so peaceful at the cottage with just the wind in the trees and the loons on the lake. We know we would have an excellent time together. First step was gathering the fishing gear, of course. I did not have fishing gear of my own, but Chris did have a tackle box filled with hooks, lines, weights, trawlers, and other such tools used to lure the best fish to your hook. I do believe we also probably complemented our fishing gear by temporarily borrowing tackle from our father's fishing chest as well. In addition, we collected our rods from the back woodshed. Mine was new, a gift from Mom and Dad at Christmas time, and Chris had his special one he had purchased years earlier, which he counted as his lucky one. Further, there was the need to ensure we packed the fish net and minnow trap. We would possibly need these if we hauled in a big one, or if we needed minnows for bait. Finally, as any fisher knows, one needs earthworms to have a successful fishing trip. Knowing we needed some, we trekked up to Sonny LaFleur's grocery store in order to buy our 2 containers of fresh earthworms. Chris knew that I did not care to actually touch the worms, so he willingly agreed to bait my hooks for me. Thanks, Chris. I know it is crazy, but worms in my mind were mini snakes as far as I was concerned. Both worms and snakes were gross, and I was deathly afraid of wiggling, slithering snakes and worms. Fishing gear is all ready. Check. Next step was preparing and packing our required weekend bedding, clothes, and grocery supplies. We would not need a lot, so we stuffed only a few pairs of jeans, some t-shirts, our jackets, 2 pair of rubber boots, 2 sleeping bags, and 2 pillows into the back seat of his car. Clothes and bedding are all ready. Check. For our meals, we had hoped to eat mostly fish, but just in case, we visited Johnny Johnston's store to get some extras. The goodies we purchased included bread, cheese, cold meat, Kraft dinner, and apples for our non-fish meals. Breakfast necessities consisted of the purchase of eggs, bacon, and brown beans. We needed a full breakfast to keep our energy going for our long day of fishing after all. For our snacks, that decision was easy. We bought chips and dip as our savory snack, and then bought the supplies we needed to make our mother's famous cottage mix. Fruit Loops, salty peanuts, and sweet raisins, all mixed together for our sweet snack. Food is now all ready. Check. Our plan was to drive up to the camp on Thursday evening and spend the whole weekend there with a return to home Sunday in time for Sunday Mass. As such, in Christopher's shiny blue Maverick car, which was now packed to its roof, we headed out. We drove slowly through town and then headed directly up the Pequannock Road. At the turnoff, where Rosie Kluk's store was, we made a quick pit stop for one last treat. After all, no weekend fishing trip can happen without her homemade old-fashioned donuts. We were on our way again, now with fresh donuts safely stashed in our styrofoam food container. We crossed the little bridge, waved to any of our cousins who may have been outdoors at our Uncle Eddie's, and started to mount the steep Polish hills. Once atop the hills, we continued past the Yarrick Farms, Great Uncle Joe Lepak's farm, and down the old stony road to Murray Lake. In less than 10 minutes, we were crossing the open hayfield, which was situated just before the entry road to the camp. We had arrived in good time. We arrived just in time to unload our supplies, open up and freshen up the cottage rooms, and start preparations for supper because the sun was setting. Chris cautioned that it would be dark in an hour, and hence there would be no time for fresh fish tonight, and we would just have to make do with hot dogs and Kraft dinner. It all sounded good to me, because I knew regardless of what we ate for our supper, we would be definitely finishing our meal with a half dozen or so of Rosie's donuts. After flipping a coin, Chris ended up being the chef, and he cooked a good feast of KD and fried hot dogs. Because he was the cook, I was the dishwasher. There were no worries because that is how chores got shared between us. After supper, darkness set in deeply, and soon it was time for us to bar the doors and latch the windows and head off to bed. With the aid of flashlights, we made up our beds, said our prayers, and wished each other good night. We really needed to sleep well because we were to get up at the crack of dawn to get out on the lake. We did get some sleep, but not a full sleep like we had wished. You see, the cottage mice came to visit us during the night, and when they scurried across your face in the middle of the night, it was a bit unsettling. Next trip, we must not forget mouse traps. Despite the intense traffic of mice all around us that night, the dawn of morning came regardless and unfortunately without a full night's sleep. Oh well, sleep did not matter, because soon we would be out on the lake and catching all the big ones. We were up before sunrise, enjoyed a healthy breakfast of bacon and eggs, had a wash up in the lake, and then got our gear and ourselves to the rowboat just in time to see the sun come up. How beautiful and peaceful Murray Lake was that morning. Its water glistened in the dim light. The call of the loons was echoing back to our ears. Okay, Chris said it is time to push off. He took the oars and slowly paddled us to the bay just beyond the point where Mom and Dad's camp was located. According to Chris, this was a great place to catch bass. We spent the morning drifting about in our boat and casting our lines as often as we could. What a beautiful morning. But sadly, it did not produce a huge catch of bass. We ended up instead with about a dozen chubs, but felt, oh well, no bass. But we would still have a tasty fish supper after all. At least we did not catch only uneatable sunfish. Yuck. After having had a yummy lunch of cheese and cold meat sandwiches, we decided to take it easy and simply relax in the afternoon. The intrusion of mice the night before made us more tired than we had thought. So, we enjoyed instead cool swims in the lake and much needed rest sitting out on the point at the front of the cottage. Chris relaxed in a lawn lounge chair, and I took on the challenge of resting quietly in the watch out, do not fall down the hill swinging hammock. The afternoon wasted away, and soon it was time to clean our morning's catch and prepare them for supper. Chris did the cleaning, heads off, guts out, wash and rinse. I did the cooking, which included heating up the big cast iron pan, dipping the fish in white flour, sizzling the butter, frying until done on side one, flipping, frying until done on side two. Our meal that night was ever so great, because we were eating our very own catch. Our fish meal was complemented by buttered bread, slices of apple, and of course we had to finish off our meal with a sweet treat, those ever so delicious homemade donuts. Friday night came and went, and again it was filled with several mouse travelers who were seeking out food or a new place to hide. Oh well, we were used to them by now. We named two of them Minnie and Mickey, and the rest were simply just cousins of these Disney pals. Saturday morning came, and again for us it was an early rise due to a lack of sleep, but who cared? We were young and full of energy. Today there would be no lake fishing. This day we decided we would take Christopher's car and drive for a bit to try catching some fresh brook trout from freshwater creeks that crossed the back roads between our camp and that of our mother's cousin Gussie LePac. Just after breakfast that morning, we packed the car with our rods, gear, and a few snacks, and then headed off for another day of fishing. Yippee! How exciting! We drove very slowly. This was important because Christopher's car was set low to the ground, and we had to be very careful when we traveled along the old back roads. There were many large rocks that were jutting out from the road, probably due to the wet spring that year, and no noticeable road repair for many, many years. We had no issues navigating because Chris could expertly swerve his car to avoid any unexpected crunches underneath. At about 10 minutes from the first creek where we wanted to fish, we came across a huge mud hole. Oh, what would we do now? The road was somewhat washed out, and what remained was nothing but soft and mushy mud. We stopped, and I asked Chris what should we do. Should we turn back or try to cross? Because both of us lads had fishing for brook trout stuck in our minds at all costs, Chris felt it was worth the risk. He explained that there was probably enough gravel at the bottom and enough hard surfaces underneath for us to pass with his car. Nope. As soon as we tried it, his tires sunk deep into the mud. What should we do now? Well, there was no choice but to get out and try to push the car, hopefully forward to get past the bog. Chris, the elder brother, decided that I should get behind the wheel and steer, because he was the stronger older brother and could put more muscle into the push. The plan was that on his count of three, I was to press on the gas and drive like hell while he pushed like hell in order to get us out of the mud. What could I do? We had to try. Okay, Chris, I said, let us try it. So behind the wheel I sat, patiently waiting for his. 1, 2, and 3. He hollered 1, 2, and 3. On 3, he pushed like hell, and I put the pedal to the metal. What was the result? The tires roared full force, and Chris ended up looking like he slept with the pigs in their pig pen because he got completely covered in mud from head to toe. After Christopher's quick cleanup, well, not really a cleanup, especially when one only has time to wipe mud from one's eyes, our next attempt was to place brush, branches, fallen wood chunks, gravel, mulch, or anything else under the back wheels of the car before we tried it again. This time, Chris took the driver's seat, and I was the one to push like hell on the count of 3. So, Chris got into the driver's seat, and I took my position behind the car. I got into place with my both hands being put firmly upon the trunk lid. Chris restarted the engine. I waited for his count of 1, 2, and 3, and I pushed as hard as I could. Slowly and happily, the car budged forward. He pressed the gas again, and we made more progress. The mud was flying like caramel pudding everywhere, but with my pushing and Christopher's driving, we made it out of the mud hole. Once we made it to the drier side of the mud hole, Chris stopped the car and waited for me to approach him. He got out of the car and laughed. He said, "Oh, my dear brother, do you ever need a bath because you now, as well as I, are completely covered in mud?" We both laughed until we fell to the ground with hurting ribs. Upon recovering from our laughing fit, we decided to just walk to the creek with our gear. We did indeed make it to the creek and did indeed catch several beautiful brook trout. We were so happy with this amazing catch that we stopped to celebrate with a hug. Fishing activities now complete for the day, we now had to think about the return trip to the camp and the dreaded mud hole. Poor Chris told me to not dread. This time he would use his magic Maverick to simply coast over the fearful mud hole because he said he had planned on driving so fast that the wheels would never touch the mud. Sounds crazy, right? Well, that is what we did. Lo and behold, Chris revved the engine of his car and drove full force into and over the fearful muddy bog. Like 2 lightning bolts, we made it. We found ourselves safely on the other side of the obstruction. The Duke boys of Dukes of Hazzards had nothing on us. Oh, by the way, did I mention while all this was happening, both Chris and I were being eaten alive by black flies, mosquitoes, deer, and horse flies? Oh well, fun country living. Anyhow, despite our Saturday adventure, we arrived safely back at the cottage. By that time, all of the troubles in the mud and the fly bites were soon forgotten. What made it all worthwhile were the fresh brook trout that we had caught. What made it all 100% worthwhile was the quality time spent together. This night, I cleaned the fish and Chris floured and fried them. We enjoyed the most wonderful dinner of tender trout together. We chowed down on fresh fish, accompanied by slices of bread and cheese, and a healthy iceberg lettuce and tomato salad. Our sweet treat that night was, of course, absolutely Rosie Kluk's old-fashioned donuts. Soon after supper, we realized that we were both very tired after such an adventure. We quickly washed up the dishes, washed our faces, bodies, and clothes of any remaining mud, said our prayers, and headed to bed. We were both so tired that night that even our friends the mice did not bother us. I know I slept like a log. I am sure if I remember correctly, Chris slept deeply as well. Sunday morning came way too early, but we rose before daylight despite the early hour, giving ourselves enough time to do the cleanup of the camp and to pack our things for the ride home. At daybreak, we locked up the camp and drove slowly back along the same route we had taken the past Thursday. Soon, we were back home in Otter Lake with ample time to put our gear and provisions away. After a good wash and shave, we were ready to get dressed in our Sunday best to join the rest of the family for Sunday Mass. I don't know about Chris, but I definitely prayed that day that I would be able to spend much more quality time with my brother at future dates to come. I did. He did. The last time I was able to enjoy a face-to-face chat with Chris was in January 2020 when we were in Shawville to visit my brother Bernie in the hospital. Chris on this particular day was there at the hospital as well, on the main floor having his dialysis treatment. I popped in to see him, thank you nurses, and had a great chat with him. He was preoccupied with our brother's failing health, but remained optimistic about how 2020 would unfold. We spoke of my retirement, and he had wished me much happiness and a wonderful trip abroad, which I was about to embark upon in celebration of my long career as a public servant. He hugged me with one of his Chrissy Bear hugs and asked me simply to remember to try to set up a barbecue with cheeseburgers in the spring for all of us, and to have yet another, at least one more fishing trip during the summer months of 2020 upon my return from the trip. I promised these with the most honest of intentions. Sadly, however, Chris became very ill while I was away, and because of COVID-19 upon my return home, we were unable to see each other again and have yet one more special Chrissy Bear hug. Those hugs will have to wait now until we are both together again. He wanted one more fishing trip, and I promise I will indeed go fishing with him one more day. But now I suppose it will be in heaven, and we will indeed catch the most beautiful angelfish. I love you, Chris. I miss you with my whole heart. Thank you for once again taking time to listen to my story. I will have more to share about dear Chris in my last story in this series soon.